Okay, World 1 students, I'm sorry I cannot be there with you guys today. I'm not feeling great. I'm sure you can hear that in my voice. But we are going to continue on with our study of African civilizations. You need to have your passport as well as your note sheet. And this video needs to be paused every once in a while so you can work on your passport pages. It's been a long time since we've talked specifically about civilizations in Africa, since we talked about Egypt at the beginning of the year and Carthage in our Rome unit. So let's talk a little bit about the environment of the African continent. Africa occupies 1/5 of the Earth's landmass, and most of the continent is divided up into three types of environment. We have deserts, where it's very hot and dry, savanna, where it's like plains and there are elevated and lower lands in the savanna, we'll look at in a second, and then rainforest area, where it's very dense vegetation, where there's lots of natural resources. And this rainforested area is area that's largely in danger today of being cut down. So, in the northern part of Africa and in the very south, we have deserts. The Sahara is the world's largest desert. It covers most of North Africa. We'll look at the map in a second. And it is roughly the size of the United States. The savanna are grassy plains that include highlands and then swampy lower areas. And the savanna covers about 40% of Africa. And then we have the rainforests. The rainforests are filled with trees with large canopies, large layers of leaves. There's lots and lots of things that live here. It's a good place to get resources from. Then we have the coastlands. The northern coast around the Mediterranean Sea and the southern tip of Africa are very similar in climate. The southern is about the same distance from the equator as the northern part, so they have about the same climate, and there's lots of people in these places. So this is a population density map from the year 2000. It shows you how many people live per square kilometer. So the darkest parts are where we see groups of people. Right here is the delta and the river, the Nile from Egypt. And then we have some other major centers of population. This is the Sahara with no people. Similar to the other map we looked at, these are climate zones. We have our desert across here. We have our rainforest in the darkest area, our dry, semi-wet, and our humid parts here. Okay, so we talked about Africa at the beginning of the year when we talked about Egypt. Africa is located on the Nile River. It was a theocracy, so that means that the pharaoh was the head of both the government and the religion, and if you think back, you remember that the pharaoh was worshipped like a god. The Egyptians practiced a polytheistic religion, and their writing was in hieroglyphics. They built elaborate tombs for their pharaohs in the form of pyramids. And remember, these are different than the Mesoamerican pyramids that we looked at last time. Those have the square platforms on the top, these do not. Nubia was the southern neighbor of Egypt. They were also located on the Nile River, and they built complex architecture similar to that we found in Egypt, and eventually they conquered Egypt, and their capital was at the city of Meroe. Okay, so this is going to be our first passport civilization. So we're going to talk about it a little bit, and then let's pause the video so that you can put them on your map and in your passport. Axum conquered the Nubia Kush territories. Axum was originally located right here. We'll look at another map in a second about how it's spread. And it became rich by being a link in trade between Central Africa and the Middle East. People came here and went on trade routes that went all the way to Greece, Rome, India. They were trading luxury goods. The goods listed here are all things that cost a lot of money, and so they were good for trading because people got wealthy from trading them. You should definitely include trade as one of the big ideas in your passport. Let's pause the video here and put the kingdom of Axum on your map. It's right here in Africa, right below Egypt. We've got the Red Sea right here, and it extended onto the land of the Arabian Peninsula. The people in Axum adopted Roman culture in a number of forms, and one of the things they adopted was Christianity. Their king, one of their kings, a guy named King Ezana, converted to Christianity and then spread Christianity throughout the kingdom. This is a stele. A stele is like a large, flat carving. They can be a lot smaller than this, like a gravestone. Many gravestones are steles. But this is a very large one that stands today in his remembrance. And many people in this part of Africa are still Christian because of the influence from Axum. The second big idea that you should have for Axum is Christianity. Axum was unique in Africa. It was one of the first to develop its own written language. It used coins for money. They farmed using terraces like the Incas and the Americas. They built dams, canals, and cisterns to hold water. A cistern is like a big underground man-made pond that holds water. What happened to Axum was that the Islamic invaders came and cut off Axum from its ports, so they couldn't get their trade in and out, and Axum became weak. In order to avoid fighting with the invaders, the king moved the capital inland to mountainous area, and Axum declined as a world power. Take a moment now to finish filling out your passport on Axum before we go on to the next civilization. Okay, let's talk about the Bantu migrations. If we remember back, migration is a move from one place or another, and in the world today, we talk about migrations in three categories: environmental, economic, and political. People either move because their environment is bad, they move because the economy is bad and they can't get a job, or they move because of political reasons. Maybe they're being persecuted. The Bantu people moved for environmental reasons. They started in what is now southwestern Nigeria. We'll look at the map in a second. They migrated south and east because their farming techniques required them to move. They didn't have enough land to support themselves. So as they moved, they took their technology with them, and they spread their language. And that language helped to unify people on the African continent. As they went, they passed that language on, and they left different dialects in different regions, but it enabled people to communicate much better. Here's where the Bantu people come from, and they spread all out along sub-Saharan Africa. Sub-Saharan means below the Sahara. Okay, we're not going to put the Bantu people in your passport. We're going to go now to the second video that goes with your second part of your Africa notes.